Yes, he did. Let's do it.
I mean, you can see right now, without LeBron, Lakers are struggling.
Let me tell you about a team I hate, all right? I know the Dallas Cowboys
Get this win. I don't know, Jack. It's a big decision.
I've often said that the people who run baseball, they try very hard to ruin it.
I'm from Brooklyn. I don't have a problem saying space.
Pittsburgh at Buffalo.
Thank you. I thought I was right. So anyway,
Yeah, Mac, you're really interested in these playoffs.
so
This is a presentation of Northeast Streaming Sports.
Good morning. You're listening to the Mac and Jack Sports Show on Northeast Streaming Sports.
And we made it to Saturday. And welcome to the Sports Memory Show here with Mac, Jack, and Doc. Glad you could come and be with us here on the National Streaming Sports Network, live on Roku, YouTube, and we're also live on Twitter or the X, whatever they call that sucker now. We're live on there too. Real quick sports update before we get into our discussion of some of the greatest legends in three sports here. Oilers did it. They tied it at 3-3 as they whooped up on Florida. What was it, 5-1? So it goes. It's 3-3. Goes back to Florida for a game 7. So Florida wins 3, Edmonton wins 3, and we'll see what happens. And this will be the first time in a long time that a Canadian team wins the Stanley Cup if Edmonton wins the last game. So today we're here to talk about three great sports legends. Willie Mays, the great Major League Baseball player, just passed away at 93 years old. We're going back boxing to the great Rocky Marciano, who retired undefeated. We're going to talk maybe if you want to talk about eras and championships and passing percentages, maybe one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, at least maybe in the top 5. So we're going to have a lot to talk about today, and we're going to start off with Willie Mays. We all know a little bit about him. Doc is going to Dr. Paul Semendinger is going to lead off talking about the Say Hey Kid for us. And, of course, me and Jack will jump in and share our thoughts with it. But, Doc, I mean, maybe the greatest baseball player of all time?
Yeah, I that's exactly what I was looking at. You know, Willie Mays, obviously one of the greatest baseball players of all time, an all-star every single year from 1954 through 1972. 660 home runs, 1,909 RBIs. He hit 301 for his career. His WAR ranks, let's see, where is he all time? Number 5 all time in WAR, behind only Babe Ruth, Walter Johnson, Cy Young, and Barry Bonds. So if you want to discount pitchers, Walter Johnson and Cy Young, and you want to discount Bonds because of the questions around the surrounding the authenticity of his performance, the only player on the Baseball Reference all-time WAR list, position player better than Willie Mays, without any marks of PEDs or anything, is Babe Ruth. So yeah, I think that puts him into the discussion of who was the greatest player of all time. Here's my interesting take on that. I don't know that he was the greatest player of all time. And I wrote this the other day. I don't even know if you can have an argument about who the greatest player of all time is, because I think the argument really is he's among the greatest players of all time. He's an inner circle Hall of Famer. And as we talk a lot about Willie Mays, the person who passed a couple of years ago, who was really his contemporary and in so many ways his equal, was Hank Aaron. When you look at their numbers, I know, like the common thing is Willie Mays was better. Well, Willie Mays was more dynamic. Willie Mays made an iconic catch that's shown on baseball footage virtually every time they show baseball footage. And Willie Mays played stickball with the kids and all that kind of stuff. But Aaron, it was really just as good, if not better. Now, you could say Willie Mays played center field. Hank Aaron played right field. Willie won a ton of Gold Gloves. Hank Aaron only won 4. But if you look at their numbers, and I don't want to get too deep into the weeds here, but Mays hit 301 for his career. Aaron hit 305. Mays hit 660 homers. Aaron hit 755. Mays hit 1909 ribbies. Aaron had 2,297. What's the purpose of the game? To score runs. Aaron scored 2,174 runs. Mays scored 2,068. I mean, those numbers are so close, but overall, you could make an argument that Hank Aaron was every bit as good as Willie Mays, if not better. So is he the greatest ever? I don't know if he's the greatest ever. Is he one of the greatest ever? Absolutely, positively.
I just want to say something, Jack. I think you're a little too caught up on numbers. I could say, well, Derek Jeter is one of the greatest hitters of all time. He's number 6 on the hit list of all time. Think of it, only 5 players in baseball history have gotten more base hits than Derek Jeter. But Derek Jeter obviously isn't one of the greatest hitters of all time. I mean, that's obvious. I mean, I'm a little older than you guys. I lived through, to an extent, I lived through the Willie Mays, Hank Aaron era. And I defer to Felipe Alou. This would have caused such a major stir in today's social media. When he was Hank Aaron's teammate on the Atlanta Braves, they asked him who was better between Hank Aaron and Willie Mays, because someone had said that Roberto Clemente was better than Hank Aaron, and there was a big controversy going on. And Felipe Alou was Mays' teammate on the Giants before playing with Aaron. He said, I know there's a big controversy going on. I don't care who gets mad at me. Let him get mad, but Willie's much the better ball player of the two. I mean, it's what you do. Hank Aaron was okay on the bases. I mean, he wasn't a liability. He was a little bit of a plus, not by much on the base paths. Hank Aaron wasn't a liability on the field. He was a decent fielder, nothing exceptional. You don't remember Hank Aaron making these great catches or being an asset that way. I mean, but Willie Mays was spectacular in the field, absolutely spectacular. He would position the other outfielders. I know the charisma part counts for a lot. Hank Aaron compiled numbers, as great as he was, and he's one of the best ever. The most homers he ever hit in a season was 47. He had that longevity. Same thing I can argue with Mantle and Mays. They were neck and neck until Mantle hit a wall late in his career, and Willie was able to keep going, and that put the argument, to rest. It's kind of the same thing.
But wait. Let me push back here. Couple things before we get lost in the weeds. I didn't just give one stat and say Derek Jeter's better than X because he has more hits. But if you want to talk about hits, Hank Aaron had 3,771. Willie Mays had 3,293. That roughly is 500 more hits. That's a couple of seasons more hits. So, but I didn't just say Aaron had more home runs. I said Aaron scored more runs. Aaron hit more home runs. Aaron had more runs batted in. Aaron had a higher batting average.
Mays played center field, but Mays played.
Yeah, I said that. But the other point is, on one hand, you're saying you have to discount what Aaron did because he had a long career.
No, I didn't say discount. No.
Well, you said he's just a compiler, and at the same time, you say Mickey Mantle wasn't as good as Willie Mays because Mays played longer. It can't be both.
Mays had a greater career, but if you
Aaron had a greater career.
You can marginally over Mays. Marginally. You could
Who's the all-time leader in home runs?
Wait. Marginally offensively with the bat. Mays played center field. Aaron played right field. There was a world of difference. Mays patrolled the whole outfield. He was the defensive coordinator with the Giants. He positioned the other outfielders. He took over games in that sense. Aaron was basically a stationary right fielder. He wasn't a spectacular right fielder. Mays was a spectacular outfielder. That's what the difference is. The naked eye is this. I like to go by the naked eye. If we were drafting guys and they were each 22 years old, 21, 22, they had their whole career ahead of them, and we knew how they could perform going forward, Mantle or Aaron, who would we take? I would take the center fielder, Willie Mays. I would draft him ahead of Hank Aaron, knowing the potential both brought to the table. If you could make them both 21, 22 years old again, and their career could restart.
Yeah, I'm what I'm saying, and don't misunderstand what I'm saying, is everybody wants to say absolutely, positively, Willie Mays is the greatest player ever. And what I started off by saying was, I don't know that he was the greatest player ever. He's in the discussion of one of the greatest players ever. And what I then said was, I think we discount Hank Aaron and say Willie Mays was so much better than Hank Aaron. And the point that I'm making was, Hank Aaron was basically, offensively at least, if you want to say that, just as good as Willie Mays. But I said Willie played center, Aaron played right. Willie won a lot of Gold Gloves, Aaron did not. But if we're going to go that argument, then you have to bring in Babe Ruth, who was also a great pitcher and the greatest hitter. And then there is no argument. Correct.
But if you take away Babe Ruth's pitching, Willie Mays would then leap ahead of him. If you discounted what
wait. Babe Ruth, take away his pitching. All right. Babe Ruth, lifetime batting average, 342. Willie Mays, 301. If you take away Babe Ruth's pitching, those years he pitched, he would have played every day. He would have accumulated even more offensive numbers.
He batted when he pitched. It wasn't like
he batted when he pitched. Yes. Once every 5 games. So in 1915, Babe Ruth played in all of 42 games. In 1916, he played in 67 games. In 1917, he played in 52 games. In 1918, he played in 95 games. In 1919, he plays in 130 games and he hits 29 homers. Double the home runs. Give Babe Ruth 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years of 20 home runs. Now he's over 800.
Give Willie Mays back the close to 2 years he was in the service.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just saying. I don't like it when people definitively say this guy was the best and they shut down the argument. I'm saying there's an argument to be had.
I agree on that.
Well, Doc, and you got to take the sensitivity and the sentiment because Willie Mays just passed away. Correct. And of course, people are going to, everybody's going to focus on Willie Mays. The only way I disagree with you, Doc, is in 2 things. When you talk about the greatest player of all time, as Jack mentioned, you're saying offensively. Willie Mays had 12 Gold Gloves, not many, 12, and 24 All-Star appearances. You say Hank Aaron had 1 Gold Glove.
No, he had 4, I think.
Okay, four Gold Gloves. And if you want to talk about running the bases, he led the league stealing bases 4 years in 4 times in his career. He was maybe the first 5-tool player. And this is where I think Willie Mays edges out a lot of people. I'm not going to say he's better than Babe Ruth. I'm not going to say he's better than Hank Aaron. I could make the argument he is, though. We could stand here and debate that for a long time, that if you're going to count defensively too, that Willie Mays may be the greatest baseball player of all time. Of course, Babe Ruth with his pitching. Hank Aaron, what he meant to the Braves. I mean, there's a lot of things that you would have to take in consideration. But if you want to say offensively and defensively, Willie Mays has a shot at being the best player of all time. And I'm not talking out of sentiment. I've always felt that way. So, I mean, I agree with you. I think Babe Ruth is the greatest just because what he did for baseball, not only what he did on the field, but what he did off the field for baseball. I think Babe Ruth is maybe one of the greatest sports players ever in the history of all sports, if you want to go down that road. But if you're going to talk about a guy who came from the Negro Leagues where he started playing. He didn't start playing in the Major League Baseball, and he came into the major leagues and then set the league on fire. I mean, it's hard to debate that he's at least not in the top 3 or 4 of all time. And that's
what helped Willie Mays a little bit.
And again, I've been saying that all along. I'm saying it's just not a lockdown argument that he's the greatest. Now, when the show started, the argument that's going to come up later is Otto Graham might be the greatest quarterback of all time because he won a whole bunch of championships. So let's also then just put that into the equation. Willie Mays won 1. Hank Aaron won 1. Hank Aaron was in only 2 World Series. Willie Mays was in 5, if you count the last one when he was on the Mets. So really 4 during the prime of his career. Babe Ruth, 10. Babe Ruth, 7 World Championships. And that wasn't just when he was with Lou Gehrig. What's that?
Willie Mays was in 4 World Series. 51.
And I think it was in 5 if you count the Mets. Let me count them again.
Counting the Mets, 51, 54, 62, and 73. It was in 4 World Series, not 5.
Oh, 4. Okay, yep. I miscounted. I counted an NLCS 71. Right. I was just doing this. As we all know, I was doing this quickly right before the show here, trying to come up with lots of different numbers. So, yeah, so really 3 World Series during his prime, if you don't count that last one when he went to the Mets in 73. So if we want to talk about winning being a factor in who the greatest of all time is, that factor does not support Hank Aaron or Willie Mays, and it tips the scale tremendously in favor of Babe Ruth, who won with the Red Sox. Then he won with the Yankees prior to Lou Gehrig, and then he won with the Yankees with Lou Gehrig. Well, it wasn't just like, he was surrounded by great players. He brought everybody else up. Okay, go on.
I could, if I'm going to use that logic, I could say Mickey Mantle was better than both until, going through the 1964 season. And if I use Mantle's 2 best years back to back, Mays and Aaron never had 2 years like that back to back. So I could say at their zenith, Mantle was better than both. So if you give me all of them for 1 season only at their very best, I could say Mantle would be number 1 if I'm going to use that argument. And I could,
again, Jack, what you're trying to do is put me into one argument. I'm making a host of arguments.
Yeah. Well, what
right?
about
I'm not saying one thing or another. I'm saying you look at the combined. So you look at that list of war guys. Take out the 2 pitchers. Babe Ruth, okay. Barry Bonds, fair enough. Willie Mays, Ty Cobb, who we talked about the other day, who is really discounted so much as a great baseball player nowadays. People don't know who Ty Cobb was. But then the next guy's Hank Aaron. This is what we're talking about. These guys are all inner circle Hall of Famers. And it's kind of silly sometimes when we try to say, like, Willie Mays was that much better. This is my whole point. Than Hank Aaron. Willie Mays is that much better than Babe Ruth. I think they're all in the conversation. And I think that's what I think that's a better conversation. Instead of shutting the conversation down and people, and you guys aren't doing that, but that's what I just hear so much of. Willie Mays was the greatest. You can't argue it. I'm just saying. No, he's in the discussion. He might be the greatest.
It's very arguable. In 1969, they named the greatest living player of all time, and it
was DiMaggio.
DiMaggio, and Mays only played 4 years after that, and they won his greatest years. So he didn't really do anything in the succeeding 4 years to tilt the scales in his favor. Yet speak to virtually everyone today, and they're going to give Mays an edge over DiMaggio. It's the same thing I heard with Joe Louis and Muhammad Ali back in the day. People thought Joe Louis was the greatest heavyweight of all time in the late 70s, early 80s. But as the years go by and you have a new generation of people and the others have passed on, perception has changed.
Yeah, and again, I think it's important to know, because the reason why we're talking about it is because he passed away, and the reaction you get from a great player passing away, all of a sudden, maybe he was the greatest of all time, or he was the greatest of all time. And, again, that is it's emotional as much as it's statistical, right? If you went to watch Willie Mays play and you didn't go watch Babe Ruth play, you're going to tilt it towards Willie Mays, right? I mean,
No. Most people consider Babe Ruth the greatest of all time because of his numbers. But what works against Babe Ruth, the people in the modern era look at him, and he didn't look like the most physically fit guy. Men, even though he had the most awesome big shoulders where he got, I'm sure a lot of his power from.
And unfortunately, Babe Ruth, a lot of the video, a lot of the old film footage isn't when he was younger. It was when he was older, and there's a stereotype of what Babe Ruth looked like, and he lived a different style of life, and he lived large and ate 57 hot dogs and drank 92 beers before the game, and all these myths and stories, and people love those things. I didn't room with Babe Ruth. I roomed with his suitcase and, all that kind of stuff. And so he becomes – you all saw the Yogi movie, I believe, a couple of years ago, that great Yogi movie. And Yogi Berra is discounted. The whole point of the movie made by his granddaughter is that his career is overlooked because he became a caricature of who he was. He was the funny guy. He was Yogi Berra. And people – didn't look at his statistics and realize what a great player he was. Today, people don't realize how great Yogi was because they just know the myths around him. And I'll take when you come to a fork in the road, take it, and all that kind of stuff, rather than looking at who he was as a baseball player. I think he won 3 MVPs, etc. I think the same thing happens to Babe Ruth. It's so long ago. Nobody has ever saw him play. I never saw Willie Mays play. I never saw Hank Aaron play. I never saw Mickey Mantle play. It's an interesting conversation, and we could finish on this again. Just to be clear, I'm not discounting Willie Mays in any way, shape, or form. I'm discounting, and Mac, I get your point that he just passed, but this has been like a baseball argument for decades. Willie Mays is the greatest. You're not allowed to argue it. And I'm just saying it's arguable. That's all I'm saying. But with Willie Mays dying, and listen how I'm going to phrase the question, because this then discounts Barry Bonds, okay? Because then we don't have to have the steroid argument. Who is the greatest, in your opinion, and then I'll tell you mine, the greatest living Hall of Famer in baseball? Isn't that a great question?
You're talking about living?
Yeah, living. Who's the greatest now? Who is the greatest? Willie Mays was the greatest living player. That was not arguable.
Well, they had that on Major League Baseball yesterday. Brian Kenny was discussing that.
He got the idea from me. I wrote it days ago. I'm not saying he stole it, but I thought of it first.
They named 2 men, the panel, with Steve Phillips and someone else, and they were thinking along the lines of either Mike Schmidt or Johnny Bench.
No way.
Those were the guys they were kind of like tilting towards. But listen, guys, are we considering pitchers?
I'm not considering pitchers because he got Koufax and position players. Who's the greatest? And Jack and Mac, who in your opinion, great? And then I'll tell you mine.
I'll tell you after Mac goes, I'll go.
I would edge towards maybe if we're going position players, maybe Carlton Fisk.
What?
I might go.
You handle this one, Doc. You take care, Mac.
It's just an opinion. Who do you think, Jack?
If you're talking about need at catcher, if I were picking a team, I would gobble up Johnny Bench, the catcher's position's crucial. But I'd say Ken Griffey Jr.
All right, so I think Griffey Jr.'s in the argument. But as I thought about it, and I wrote this, maybe a week ago, I think it's Ricky.
Ricky Henderson? Maybe
3,000 hits. No one scored more runs. No, great base stealer, power hitter.
It is a question of opinion. I mean,
it's just an opinion.
To me, you could call Yastrzemski's part of that conversation too.
I think so too. I do.
But
I would go at Ricky.
Again, the naked eye test. When A-Rod, who's a truly great player, we can all agree on that. A-Rod is a all-time great player.
Right, but he's not in the argument because he's not in the
Hall
of Fame.
No, I don't mean to make him in the argument per se, but when he was on the Seattle Mariners and he was Ken Griffey's teammate, there wasn't even a serious discussion who the best player on the Mariners was. It was Ken Griffey Jr. hands down. Even Lou Piniella was saying Ken Griffey Jr. was the man. Even A-Rod says it's not even an argument. Ken Griffey Jr. is the better player between the two of us, point blank. I mean,
Well, I think Griffey's better than Schmidt and Bench. I mean, Schmidt and Bench, that's nice. They're fun. Bench is probably the greatest catcher. I'll disagree with Mac. Schmidt's probably the greatest third baseman.
There's value, Doc and Mac. Okay,
yeah, I know, but we're not.
I laughed a moment ago at Mac picking Carlton Fisk, but what's good about Carlton Fisk, there haven't been that many truly great catchers in baseball history when you think of it. And it's such a premium position. If you can get a great catcher like a Johnny Bench, how do you bypass him for any other position? This is Johnny Bench. Imagine having him behind the plate full time. He calls a great game, has one of the great arms of all time, a real leader, really good with the bat. I mean,
I don't think Fisk ever was on a world champion, was he? I don't think
no,
so.
They came close in 75.
Yeah, but he's never. I mean, Bench won a whole bunch.
Well, Bench was part of the Big Red Machine.
Big Red Machine, sure.
And they had the Fisk Munson argument,
yes. And against the Big Red Machine, Fisk hit that home run that sent it to 7 games. I mean,
yeah. One of the great moments in baseball history, one of the most charismatic moments.
So as we leave the Willie Mays conversation, let's talk about the one and only undefeated heavyweight champion of all time, Jack, right? The great Rocky Marciano. I think it was 49-0, if I'm not mistaken.
43 stoppages. And being undefeated, the career is a nice accomplishment, but it's a little overrated, a little deceiving. If you want to, for those who say, well, Marciano was the best of all time, he never lost. It doesn't quite work that way. It's like saying the Miami Dolphin team that was unbeaten was the greatest NFL team of all time. And they weren't, even though they were a great team. And, Marciano is the most overrated and underrated heavyweight champion at the same time. He held the title from 1952 to 1956. And, he fought some decent guys on the way up, now world beaters, had 6 title defenses. The way he won it against Jersey Joe Walcott on September 23rd, 1952 in Philadelphia was legendary. Walcott, the defending champion, wasn't impressed with Marciano. He said, if he beats me, take my name out of the record books. And Walcott, who was 38 at the time, but in his prime, came out firing. Knocked Marciano down for the first time in Marciano's career. Marciano was down, losing on points. Also, there's a little suspicion some hanky-panky was going on because Marciano's eyes were burning badly. Supposedly something had gotten on Walcott's gloves. Maybe something was put on, maybe it wasn't. Who has a clue now? But Marciano hung in there behind on points. He basically knocks Walcott out with one punch in the 13th round. Walcott backs to the ropes. Rocky smashes him with a tremendous right hand. To me, it was more like a 2-punch knockout. Everyone calls it a 1-punch knockout because he followed up with a left hook to the ear. And I have to feel that had an effect. And Walcott crumbled, counted out. Then Marciano had a few more title defenses. And listen, Marciano was a great fighter. I mean, he trained, he'd go to camp for 4 months. And that's all he'd do. Not the fighters of today don't quite train as hard as Marciano, a little short of his training methods. But had steroids been around at Marciano's time, you may have thought he was on them, because that's how he worked out, and that's how he looked. Really, tough as nails. And I was in Brockton, Massachusetts, in September 2012 when they, unveiled a statue of him in his hometown there.
So, Jack, the biggest knock against him was the competition of the time. He really didn't fight a group of heavyweights that were like in the 70s or maybe the the 80s and 90s. There was a little older fighters he fought like Lewis and that, but he did beat a couple upcoming fighters. He did end up fighting Archie Moore, the light heavyweight champion. And Marciano wasn't really a big, heavy guy, right? He was short and stocky. I remember he used to stay back and keep his left out all the time. And that's the kind of way he fought people.
No, he didn't stay back. Marciano always moved.
Well, I mean, he led with his left, seemed to always be out there, just kind of, as he came in. I mean, that's the stance it looked like to me anyway when he was coming in. His left was kind of always probing. Do you think Marciano would have been a heavyweight today, or would he have been a light heavyweight today?
That's the big argument. Let me just address as far as Marciano beating old men. He knocked out Joe Louis in the 8th round, October 26, 1951 in Madison Square Garden. Louis was still a good fighter. He wasn't in his prime. Louis was way past his prime, but still competent enough to beat most heavyweights, even though he wasn't the Joe Louis that we knew anymore. Joe Louis in his prime would not have been a lock to beat Marciano. More likely than not, Louis would have, but it wouldn't be an absolute lock for him to do it. And as far as his title defenses go, he fought as a Charles twice. Charles was clearly past his prime. And the first fight, Marciano had to rally late in the fight to win a 15-round decision. It wasn't disputed. Marciano earned the decision, but it was a tough fight. In the second fight, I don't know, was it an elbow from Charles, but it split open Marciano's nose to the bone, and they were going to stop the fight, and Marciano then knocked Charles out in the 8th round. That's legendary stuff when they're about to stop a fight, and you knock your opponent out. And Archie Moore, you could say was a light heavyweight, but him and Rocky weighed the same. Rocky only weighed in the high 180s, but that's the same with all athletes of the past. If they were living today, their bodies would have adjusted. They'd all be bigger. We were talking about, Mickey Mantle, Willie Mays, Hank Aaron a little while ago. They all would have been a little bigger. They all would have been a little bigger today because, that's just the way it is. People would have grown and the bodies adjust to it. Yeah.
There was one rival that I read about that he fought twice was Roland Lastarza.
Yeah.
And he fought him twice. Was Lastarza a championship caliber fighter?
A legitimate top contender. Very, very good. And you notice all these great champions or anyone who sets records, they tend to have close calls. And Marciano's close call in his career before he became champion, when he wasn't getting into contender's position, he fought Roland Lastarza at Madison Square Garden, and he won a split decision. He just barely eked it out. The decision easily could have been given to Lastarza, and if it was, imagine how history would have played out. Imagine how we would have perceived Marciano's career. I mean, it happens so much of the time that way. Like even like Floyd Mayweather Jr., he keeps bragging he's the best because he's unbeaten, but he fought a fighter, Jose Luis Castillo, when he was champion, and most people feel Castillo beat Mayweather. I had it scored a draw. Imagine if Mayweather didn't get the decision. We would perceive him so much differently. He would have lost his bragging rights.
Right. So if you were gonna give would Marciano be in your top 10 heavyweights of all time, Jack, or would he be just out of that?
I don't think he would have been in my top 10 if you're asking me, would he head to head, would he have beaten guys? The guys who came later, I mean, I hate to say it, I doubt if he would have beaten Ali. I doubt if he would have beaten Joe Frazier. I doubt if he would have beaten Sonny Liston, or Lennox Lewis afterwards. But, George Foreman, certainly, him coming into George Foreman, yeah. He would have been made for George Foreman, I think. But Marciano has nearly a cult following. I mean, people who might be listening to this might be very angry at me, like I have no idea what I'm talking about. But I will say this, if I have to rate era for era and disregard head-to-head matchups because it's all speculative, who were the best heavyweight champions of their era, who defined their era the most, who dominated their era the most? Yeah. In all probability, yeah, he would have rated my top 10. He would if I sat down and compiled a list, because Marciano was a great heavyweight champion in his era.
Right. Okay. So he died in a plane. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, if you're going to go eras, right? I think your first era is probably Jack Jones, right? Jack Johnson. And then you have
John L. Sullivan, actually.
All right, okay. And then Jack Dempsey.
Yeah.
And then Joe Louis. And then Marciano. And then Ali. No, right? Like
very
those
good. Good stuff, Doug. You nailed it there. Those are the primary all-time greats.
So if you're doing that, he's definitely one of the greatest of his era. And the question is, I was just making a list of. I wrote Marciano, Lewis, Ali, Dempsey, and then I wrote Larry Holmes, Joe Frazier, Jack Johnson, Mike Tyson, Lennox Lewis, Evander Holyfield. Those, and maybe Klitschko. Those would be the greatest heavyweights of all time. No,
everyone forgot one guy way back in the past. The guy who Jack Johnson beat in the Great White Hope, Jim Jeffries. Jim Jeffries was revered during the early 1900s as being unbeatable, a legendary champion. He retired at age 29. He came back after 6 years at age 35. He didn't want to come back to fight Jack Johnson, but he did it to restore the honor of the white race. He didn't want to do that. He wasn't against the black man holding the title by all accounts. He couldn't care less. And Johnson beat him, completely dominated him. Jeffries was like out of shape completely, hadn't been doing anything for years. And no fighter's legacy was ever hurt more than Jim Jeffries was by coming back to the ring and suffering a defeat when he was way past his prime. And it elevated Johnson to a position maybe it shouldn't have. But, it's what is, though.
Yeah, that's it's so many things. What if this happened or if that happened? How history, one little thing could have changed.
I'm sorry, Mac. I shouldn't have cut in with you. I was thinking for one moment, how come ball players rarely make comebacks, but fighters do? Like you hear about Don Mattingly after he retired, he thought about coming back after 1 year, but it was too much of a job. His back bothered him, so he didn't do it. But a great baseball player, you don't hear him coming back 2-3 years later. But
Ryan
Sandberg
time. Came back.
Not
many.
I don't hear about it.
I think boxers really are just boxers. Baseball players, there's plenty of announcing jobs, coaching jobs, a lot of extra things they can stay around the game. Boxing, you could train maybe or be an announcer. I mean, there's not a lot of jobs for boxers outside the boxing industry, is there?
I think you know what I think it is? I hear what you're saying, Mac, and it's accurate what you're saying. But I think you have to make a roster if you're a baseball player. If you decide you're coming back, you have to make the team. And they're not going to give you the mega money, not knowing what you bring to the table. They'll invite you to spring training. There was talk Mariano Rivera. Even now, as crazy as it would seem, if Mariano called up the Yankees, he sat down with Brian Cashman and said, I've been thrown in the park. I still got it. My cut is working. They would smile and say, we love you, Mariano, but they would still invite him behind closed doors to have the scouts look at him, and they might even invite him to spring training. They wouldn't give him the big money. Maybe they'd give him $2 million a year, whatever, to be a middle reliever. But, they would give him a look. But if you're a boxer, you can just get a fight. And if you have a reputation, a big name, you could. Mike Tyson, look at that case. What's he been off? How many years? 25 years or whatever. I'm just.
Would Mario? I don't know. Do you think Mariano Rivera would still be effective at his age right now, even if his cutter was somewhat good? I mean, he still threw it 96 miles an hour, Jack. It wasn't just a cutter.
I'll let Doc handle that one.
I don't think.
I think logic says. I think Mariano's, mid-50s at this point. I think logic says he couldn't do it. I think our hearts want to believe that he could. I think we'd all be thrilled if somehow Mariano was signed by the Yankees and he had this story of he's been working and his fastball is still in the upper 80s and his cutter is as sharp as ever. I think that would be compelling. But I think you're making it's not going to happen. It's not realistic. With fighters, yeah, everybody always believes the fighter has one last great fight in him. So all you need to do is get an opponent. You don't have to make a team and play every day.
And in boxing, you always got the puncher's chance, right? If you're a guy like George Foreman, which is an anomaly, but he had power and he could knock you out with his jab, for Christ's sake. I mean, the guy was a monster. So he has a chance at doing that. But to go out and play an actual game of football or baseball or hockey, it's a little bit, I'm not going to say more rigorous. I'm going to say there's a little bit more to it, though. I mean, George Foreman can knock you out with one punch. You can't, you make a throw over the first and you pull your arm and you're out of the game. I get it. I mean,
right. And you have to play the next day or the next week in a sport. With boxing, you gear up for one event.
Well, about getting back, what about a knuckleball specialist? I mean, can they still? I mean, you can throw a knuckleball into an old age, I would think, because it's a specialized pitch.
Well,
listen, if they could do it, if Phil Niekro could have kept pitching, he would have kept pitching. No one's done it. So I think the idea is it's a romantic idea. It's cute and it's fun. It's not realistic.
Let me put this in here. I threw a knuckleball as a changeup, right? Everybody thinks it's easy to throw a knuckleball pitch. It's not easy. I mean, it's hard to get that sucker to break and drop and move. I mean, it goes flat sometimes, and that's why a lot of knuckleball pitchers don't make it in the major leagues because it's like pitching practice, right? Batting practice. I mean, to make that thing dance, it takes a lot. It's not easy. Everybody thinks it's easy. It's not to throw a knuckleball.
Guys, maybe Doc could look this up. I always heard about Satchel Paige.
Yeah, Satchel Paige was in his 50s. I was thinking of him.
And was he a legitimate pitcher in his 50s?
I don't think so. I think he had some legitimately good games. So here's Satchel Paige's numbers here at the very end of his career. When he came back in 1965.
Wow.
He'd been out of the game since 1953. So he was 58 years old. He comes back. And he pitches in one game. He goes 3 innings, allows only 1 hit. Somehow I think that was by Carl Yastrzemski. I'm not sure if that's true or not. He struck a guy out and allowed no runs. He did that as a 58-year-old guy.
Wow.
His last full season as a pitcher was 1953. He was 46. He went 3-9 in 57 games, pitched 117 innings, gave up less than a hit an inning, gave up only 114 hits. He had a 3.53 ERA, and he's doing that for the terrible team, the St. Louis Browns. So, yeah, I mean, he pitched into a late old age, but if he could still do it, I would have thought the Browns, I don't know the story, would have brought him back in 1954. They didn't. Maybe Satchel had enough. But yeah, I think he's a good example. He came back at 58. I think Mariano's about 56. He's in that ballpark. Maybe he's 58. Maybe he's around there. It's not really going to happen. It's romantic. It's fun. It's cute. It's adorable and all that kind of stuff, but it's not going to happen.
Well, I mean, listen, there was talk that Nolan Ryan, as recently as a few years ago, was still throwing about 88 miles an hour, which is incredible.
Well, Roger Clemens pitched against a college team a couple of years ago, and he had problems. He was throwing in the high 80s. He had problems with his control. He was walking a number of guys.
Yeah, it's rigorous, man. It's rigorous to do that, all that training and stuff. So let's get into the football portion of the show. There's a quarterback that was one of the greatest throwing quarterbacks in a running era back in the 40s. Otto Graham wore number 60 for years until they finally made him get rid of it, and he had to wear number 14 to close out his year. But he ended up winning 7 out of 10 championships, only equaled by Tom Brady later on in his career, as he won 7 out of 10. He also had the perfect passing percentage of 121.1 it was finally broken by Joe Montana in 1989. Two of the greatest quarterbacks of all time to end up breaking two of the biggest records. So he ended up going to a college on a basketball scholarship, and he ended up playing in his sophomore year. He came out as a quarterback. He ended up going to North Carolina University. But in his second year, and his first year as a quarterback, he ended up winning the game as the quarterback 51-3. That was his opening game. And I mean, listen, he returned a punt for 90 yards for a touchdown. He threw for 2 touchdowns. He ran for 2 touchdowns. He ended up leading the team, beating the Ohio State Buckeyes, giving them their only loss for that season, coached by Paul Brown, the eventual coach of the Cleveland Browns. And that's how Otto Graham and Paul Brown ended up meeting. In 1943, he set another Big Ten record, voted the MVP of the conference. And his last year, when he did go to North Carolina University, he played under head coaches Bear Bryant and I guess his assistant head coach Glenn Klinger at North Carolina University. So he played under the great Bear Bryant. So he's still, the war is going on, guys, at this time. He's a member of the military at the time. Paul Brown comes and offers him a contract that would pay him $7,500 for the year. It's equivalent to about $230,000 in 2023. But he's in the war, so he can't start playing and can't pay him. What Paul Brown did was pay him $250 a month while he was in the war, so that he would come and sign with the Browns. And of course, Otto Graham agreed to this. So that $250 a month was equivalent to like $4,200 monthly right now. So while he wasn't playing, Paul Brown wanted Otto Graham so bad that he paid him while he was in the war. When the war ended, he went over to play for the Cleveland Browns. And in the first 2 years of Otto Graham being there, they were undefeated. They won consecutive games for 2 years and won the first 2 championships. In the 30-28 win against the Rams, the second championship, he ran for 99 yards, threw for 298 yards and 4 touchdowns. And that's where he had that year he had the quarterback rating of 112.1. So in 54 was supposed to be his retirement year. He said he was going to retire. He led the Cleveland Browns to their 1956 to their championship win against the Detroit Lions. And again, Paul Brown talked him to coming back in the following year, and again led him to the championship game where he ran for 2 touchdowns and passed for 2 more touchdowns. And of course, he's inducted into the College Hall of Fame and the Professional Football Hall of Fame. He wasn't there when Jim Brown was. He retired 2 years before Jim Brown. So Marion Motley was his number 1 running back at the time. What's really interesting about this, guys, of course, Paul Brown is considered by a lot of football historians and some Super Bowl coaches as the greatest coach of all time. Innovative, brought the T formation in, threw to 4 different wide receivers. And really, Otto Graham, according to a lot of these people, a lot of historians, was the most dominant player during the 40s and into the early 50s. And as I said, he was playing during a running era where Marion Motley got a lot of carries. I think that Otto Graham, from his basketball playing, could move around in the pocket, was a great running quarterback, and throwing for over 20,000 yards in his 10 years there is incredible for that time. And if the rules were the same, and we always have these discussions, if the rules were the same about hitting quarterbacks, about hitting receivers, about pass interference, his numbers probably would have been that much more. He might have been up there with some of the great quarterbacks of all time. But what do you think about a guy that gets a basketball scholarship, comes out, tries out for a team, and instantly instantly becomes a star in college, goes to pros in his first year, guys, brings them to the championship. And when the Browns join the NFL, he brings the Browns to the championship again. There's something to be said about that, about the leader he was, the kind of quarterback he was, and the kind of individual he was. And if he played today, if he did, and of course, everything's different. It's hard to compare today to yesterday, but I think he would be one of the top quarterbacks today too.
I don't think you could go there with that. The players of that time in the NFL don't compare to the players of today. The players of today would obliterate them. They're so much bigger, stronger, and faster. It's not even a comparison.
Well,
And
you say that.
even Frank Gifford said that all the time. Frank Gifford, a great player in the 50s and in the early 60s for the Giants, is in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, great broadcaster. They asked how his Giant teams would have done against the others. He says, no, the players are so much bigger, faster, stronger. And he was talking about players in the 70s. Don't even
You say that. You
the
say
NFL
that.
was in its
You say
infancy
that,
then
Jack. You
in
say
the
that, Jack.
40s.
I keep over talking you so I can talk. You say that, but how big was Joe Montana? How big
I'm
and
not talking about
strong?
how big he was.
How big was Drew Brees? We're talking about the quarterback position, Jack. We're not talking about the defensive lineman and the running back position. I'm talking about the quarterback position. How big was Drew Brees?
I mean, maybe Otto Graham would have. He maybe would have adjusted to the times and been an all-time great today. Maybe he would have been the best quarterback in the game today. Who knows? There's no way of knowing for sure. But you can't compare the caliber of NFL play during his time to this era today. You just can't.
I can. I can compare Jimmy Brown to any running back today. I can compare
Jimmy Brown. Wait. Jimmy Brown played, basically in the 60s.
Late 50s, early 60s. That's when Frank Gifford played. So see, this is what I'm saying, Jack. You're taking these guys are bigger and faster and stronger today, but you just said that boxers would be bigger, stronger today as from
their body would have adjusted. And Otto Graham, let's say, would have adjusted. Sure,
okay.
Absolutely. But what he did, maybe he would have been an elite quarterback today. But what I'm saying, it would have been a totally different dynamic to go against all the complex defenses and the great athletes as opposed to what he went against at the time. Maybe he would have been. If you want to rate Otto Graham, you can rate him as one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time if you're judging era against era for what he did in his era compared to what someone else did in their era. And if you want to talk about championships, it's so much harder to win a championship today going through the playoff format as compared to what it was years ago. Even talking baseball a while ago, those great Yankee teams from 1949 through 1964, would they have still gotten to the World Series and won it the years they did? Perhaps. We'll never know. But it would have been so much harder if they had to deal with today's playoff format, the playoff rounds to get there.
Well, no argument there. No argument on that point. Doc, I mean, what do you think? I mean, here you got people, let's talk. You got A-Rod playing shortstop. You got Pee Wee Reese playing shortstop. A-Rod is the better athlete, but could Pee Wee Reese play today? Could he be Anthony Volpe? I mean, Joe Montana weighed 180 pounds. I mean, he was light and he was skinny. Joe Namath wasn't a massive guy either. He's a good sized guy, but he wasn't massive. He wasn't a Trevor Lawrence. So, I mean, to me, of course, the era you have to take a look at, but there are some players that transcend eras. And I think Otto Graham was one. I think Pee Wee Reese and Phil Rizzuto would have been a couple of them. Not great ball players, but darn good shortstops. And I think people like this could play today.
Yeah, I think what they were the best players of their era, which means that by definition, giving all things being equal, the nutrition, the coaching, the equipment, et cetera, you'd have to assume that giving them all of those bonuses or all of those considerations, their skills would still be that much better than their competition, right? Phil Rizzuto was a great shortstop in his era. You'd have to assume that he'd be a little bigger, a little faster, a little stronger, and then you'd compare him to the shortstops of today, and he'd probably still be pretty darn good. Yeah, I think this was my point in the beginning. We start to say, well, this guy is absolutely the best, and the players of this era can't play in that era, and we get perceptions of what these guys looked like or what how they played, and well, he couldn't do it in today's game. I think Babe Ruth in today's game would be great. Why do I think that? Because Babe Ruth in his day was great.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I'll take it a step further. With the quarterbacks today or the players of today, without that nutrition, without that workout that they do now, and with the rules being a lot different, a lot harder, a lot rougher in some of the rougher sports, could they play in that era? I mean, you can make the argument both ways here. Right? So I mean, so instead of Tom Brady being 6'4", 230 pounds, maybe he's 6'1" and 180 pounds. So I mean, we don't, and this is the thing, we don't know. And I agree with you there, Doc. And I agree with some points Jack's making too. The thing I'm saying is when you got a quarterback that is designed, the offense is designed around him. When Paul Brown got him and said, well, we're going to start throwing the ball like no other team in football, and not only do it, but win 7 out of 10 championships and become the greatest quarterback and records holding until Fran Tarkenton passed him some 50 years later. I mean, 50 years later, some 30, 40 years later. I mean, to me, that's pretty good. And again, this is why I'm talking about Otto Graham, a guy that we forget about. There's a lot more quarterbacks back then that we don't talk about, but Otto Graham was the best of the 40s and early 50s.
Well, one thing I think we can all agree upon, we should judge these athletes what they did in their era. You know, everything else is speculation. Even with Babe Ruth, you can make an argument if you want, well, maybe he couldn't have been nearly as good in today's era. He may have just been another guy. You can make that argument if you want, but consider that in Babe Ruth's era, how come no other player could even approach what he did? Okay, so if the competition was weak, this and that, you mean you couldn't find anyone else to even be, close to him? I mean, Lou Gehrig was great, Lou Gehrig, but there would have been several others as well.
Well, they were great players. I mean, one of the things is we've forgotten about Rogers Hornsby and Tris Speaker and Ty Cobb and Joe Jackson. I mean, we could just go down the list of all the great players in the 20s and the teens and all that kind of Eddie Collins. I mean, we just go on and on and on.
Yeah.
But what happens too is Babe Ruth was so much greater. He so much overshadowed everyone else that people just think, well, it was just Babe Ruth. But that point that you're making is he was so much better that, again, making everything equal, he'd probably be that much better than everybody else today.
And the New York link helped these guys at the time, because playing for New York at that time before this explosion on social media was an advantage. Ruth was from New York, Mays, DiMaggio, Mantle, Aaron wasn't.
You could make that argument, in Babe Ruth's era was New York. I don't know. Maybe
Boston was a huge market.
He started coming up in Boston. Ty Cobb played for the Tigers, and I don't know if it wasn't really media like it is today, a national media. There wasn't TV.
Right.
Radio was just coming.
Hank Aaron did originally play with the Boston Braves, right? I mean, before the Braves moved.
No, he played for Milwaukee Braves.
Oh, sorry, my bad. I know the Boston Braves. Yeah, that's true. He did play for the Milwaukee Braves. You are correct. So, folks, this is the top of the show. I hope you enjoyed it. Love going back and talking about the greatest of all time, legends. We'll continue on. Next week, we'll start getting into the 60s and Doc's favorite era, of course, with the Beatles. They started off in about 63, 64. Me, I'm a Rolling Stone guy. Jack still likes Frank Sinatra the best, I think. I'm not sure about that, but I think he likes the big band era better than anything else.
Well, the question we're going to debate just quickly next week, Shea Stadium. Was it rocking more when the Mets won Game 6 of the World Series or when the Beatles performed?
I would have no way of judging that, but probably when the Beatles performed. I don't even think they
won the
played
World
like
Series and the Beatles performed. More electricity in Shea Stadium.
probably
Yeah,
when the
well.
Beatles performed, but who knows?
Probably the greatest boy-girl group of all time, the Beatles.
No way. They're
Everyone-
not. That's so incorrect. They did so many things that they played hard rock when they needed to. They invented so many parts of music that the Stones. The Stones got their biggest hit. The Stones' biggest hit was written by their first big hit was written by who? Lennon and McCartney.
I know. I also know that Mick Jagger and I'm trying to remember his other Richardson wrote a couple for the Beatles too. We'll get into that one day. That'll be a great debate. Anyway, folks, have a great Saturday. We'll see you tomorrow on the Big Football Show and more. Jack will be on Monday with his compadre Frank Latirzo on the Glove Fist, and of course, start spreading the news 9:00 p.m. Eastern with Doc and EJ, and they'll give you all the Yankee news and anything associated with the Yankees.
Persia and myself on 7 p.m. Eastern time on Monday.
Yes, you are. 7 p.m. Eastern. Remember that, folks. We'll see you again tomorrow on the Big Football Show. More. Have a good Saturday.